Hi guys! Today we're going to be talking about all the books that I read in April. So April was a pretty good reading month for me. I kind of slowed down towards the end just because I got really busy with other life stuff, but I still managed to read quite a few books, and I try to organize this mostly in the order that I read them, but it may not be exact, but I'm going to try. So I started off the month by reading Act Your Age, Eve Brown, which is the last book in the Brown Sisters trilogy. And this one follows the youngest sister, Eve, who is irresponsible and can't manage to kind of hold down a career. And her parents finally have had enough and basically threaten to cut her off unless she holds a job for a year. So she ends up leaving and kind of stumbling into this chef position at a B&B run by this man named Jacob, who is the total opposite of Eve. He is very rigid and structured, and he has rules that he abides by. He's kind of got a stick up his butt. So it's fun seeing him and Eve interact and eventually end up catching feelings for one another. They make such a great couple, and they truly bring out the best in one another. This one was my favorite of the Brown Sisters trilogy. I thought Eve was just so charming and just so full of love, and it was really wonderful to take a peek inside her head, because the previous two novels, you didn't really know much about Eve. She was just sort of like there, but she's a very internal person, and getting her perspective was really such a delight. And this, again, my favorite book in the trilogy. I'm going to come back to it again and again. It was so cute. And I gave this one 5 stars, if I didn't mention that earlier. Next book I read was Finlay, Donovan is Killing It. And this is a book I actually purchased in the last month, and I was so excited. I had to read it right away. I saw that Gabby from Gabby Reads really liked it. I was just so intrigued by the premise, which is that Finlay Donovan is a recently divorced, now single mom, and she's trying to juggle sort of raising her kids and handling the bills and also writing murder mystery novels. And one day she has a meeting with her agent at a Panera Bread, and they're talking about her newest book. And they're talking about a murder within the book. Someone overhears her and mistakes Finlay for a contract killer and approaches her with an offer for $50,000 to get rid of her husband. So Finlay is like, no, you don't understand. But also $50,000? Like, that would completely change her life. She really has to kind of juggle, like, what the heck? Like, what do I do? And it was so, like, weirdly funny. Like, the premise was just so bizarre and hilarious to me. I had to check it out. Throughout, I thought it was really funny, really charming. I really liked Finlay as a character. It was really fun watching this sort of crazy plot unfold, and the ending, oh my gosh, I literally gasped out loud on the last page. I really hope this is a series, because just the potential that last page alone promised was so exciting. So I gave this one 4 stars. It was a really great book, and again, really promising start to what I hope is a series. And if not, I think this would make a fabulous adaptation, like a movie or a limited series or something. It was just so fun. The next book I read this month was My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones, which was actually an arc. It comes out in August, I believe. I was really intrigued to pick this one up because I'd heard his previous book, The Only Good Indians, which came out last year, was really phenomenal, really creepy. And the premise of this one was really interesting to me. It follows a girl who is obsessed with, like, slasher films, mostly from, like, the 80s, but a little bit earlier than that too. She's so obsessed with this sort of type of story. She, like, wants her life to be a slasher film. Like, she wants one to unfold around her, and things start happening in her community that convinces her that something like a slasher film is about to go down. And so she must identify who the final girl is supposed to be, which is, in a slasher film, the one girl left standing at the end of all of it, who has the final showdown with the slasher himself. The main character, Jade, doesn't think she herself is worthy of being the final girl. This book was truly a love letter to people who really enjoy slasher films, horror films. That's not really my jam. I like scary books, but slasher films in general just aren't my thing. Jade kind of goes on and on about very specific films that I just find, like, I personally don't really care for. So this book wasn't bad. It just wasn't for me, really. So I gave this one 2 stars. I think for the right person, it is a higher rated book. I did enjoy the writing style. I think I still want to check out other works by Stephen Graham Jones, but this one, unfortunately, just was not for me. I also picked up a few graphic novels this month because I feel like I've been kind of slacking on my graphic novel collection. I've got a growing pile of unread ones, but I haven't been doing a great job at prioritizing actually reading them. So I made a point to this month. So starting with The Golden Age by Roxane Moriel and Cyril Pedroza. This, I believe, is translated from French. This is the first volume in a series of graphic novels that follows Princess Tilda, and her father's just passed away. She's ready to assume the throne, but her brother ends up actually kind of overthrowing her and chasing her out of the kingdom. And so she must go to the countryside to gather support to try to win her throne back. Meanwhile, this sort of revolution is also happening within the peasant class. They're really fighting for a return to the Golden Age in which everyone was equal. There were no, royalty and serf classes. Everyone shared resources. So Tilda is fighting both her brother and this idea that's sort of overtaking the population, and she's really at odds with everyone in this book, and it's really interesting. I ended up giving this one a 3 stars just because I feel like for the first volume, not a whole lot happened, but it did have quite a bit to establish. But the art style is also really gorgeous. For that alone, I definitely recommend picking it up. It's so pretty and so well done. And I'm really looking forward to hopefully finding the second volume in hardcover. I haven't seen it yet, but this was a good find, so definitely recommend. I also ended up picking up Strange Academy, which this is the first volume. There's only 1 volume out right now. This follows a class of young sorcerers as they're trying to kind of figure out their abilities, and they're the first class for this academy that Doctor Strange has established in New Orleans. So there's a really great cast of kids in this. I think it's a really good starting point. If you're looking to get into Marvel Comics, there's quite a few sort of periphery characters that are familiar, like Scarlet Witch makes an appearance, Doctor Strange is there, obviously, but the focus of the story is really on a new generation of heroes and sorcerers. It was really fun learning all their personalities and seeing them all interact with one another. You have 2 kids from Asgard, you have a frost giant, you have a zombie girl, you have a demon, you have the literal child of Dormammu, who is one of Doctor Strange's arch nemesis. And it's a wonderful cast of kids, and they're also funny and charming, and this was a really great, I think, first volume to a story, and I'm really excited to see where it goes. So I will definitely be picking up the next volume when it comes out, and I give this one 4 stars. The final graphic novel I picked up this month was Heartstopper Volume 1. I found this for a really great deal. It was like $6 when they're normally like 12 to 14. And I've heard such wonderful things about this story, so I had to check it out for myself. And in it, we follow 2 teenage boys, Charlie and Nick. And Charlie was actually outed at school the previous year and has overcome a lot of bullying and sort of trying to take back control over his life and his identity. We're starting a new year at school, and he meets this boy named Nick, who is super popular. He's on the rugby team. He's really nice and charming, and they become fast friends. As their friendship develops, Charlie finds himself developing feelings for Nick, and he's kind of devastated by this because Nick is his best friend, and also he feels like he got caught feelings for a straight boy, which is a hard situation to be in. But Nick is also sort of trying to figure out his feelings for Charlie and what that might mean, because Charlie's like his best friend, but he also might feel something more. This first volume really just goes in depth on their relationship, and it's so heartwarming and cute and fluffy, and I can't wait to get the other volumes. I've also been reading it on Webtoon because I'm impatient, and this story really just tackles some really, really big, heavy, important themes. So it isn't just all fluff and cuteness, but there is definitely a lot of that. So definitely recommend. I gave this one 5 stars. It was one of the cutest graphic novels I've ever read. All right, back to novels. Next up, we have This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Motar and Max Gladstone. This book, I initially felt like I wasn't smart enough to read. I went back and forth on reading it physically and listening to the audiobook to kind of see what worked best for me, because this is a very abstract and lyrical story, and it's also science fiction, so it does not do much to kind of slowly introduce the reader into what is happening. But we do follow these two characters, Red and Blue, and they are on opposite sides of a very vaguely, loosely described time war, and they are able to go up and down thread to influence certain things to happen in order for their side to win this time war. They're both like the best agents on their respective sides, and one day Red finds herself in a mission that has gone awry, and she finds a letter that was penned by Blue that is basically boasting. She's bragging that she has foiled her and just basically taunting her, and also by leaving this letter and by Red reading it, it also opens up Red to some scrutiny from her higher ups about whether or not she's a traitor. So you end up following this sort of back and forth between Red and Blue as they are, again, foiling each other's missions and leaving each other these letters that eventually become more and more intimate. I did end up sticking with the audio because I feel like the narrators did a really good job of kind of describing, again, the very abstract and lyrical sort of events that were happening. And the letters to one another were just like so full of emotion, especially towards the end. But I did end up really loving this book. I don't think it is for someone looking for a very light read, despite its size. It's a little misleading in that way because, again, it's not the most straightforward story, but it is a really interesting love story. And I'm really glad that I read it. And I think it was a beautiful, beautiful piece of writing that probably only gets better with each reread. So I'm looking forward to picking this up again at some point and kind of seeing how a reread affects how I think. But I did give this 5 stars because I thought this was a beautiful book. Next up, we have what is probably my favorite read of the month. I have a whole vlog where I'm basically gushing about how much I love this book, but that is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. This book is a YA fantasy that takes place in the real world. We follow Bree, who has recently, unfortunately, lost her mother, and she's also in this early acceptance program to UNC Chapel Hill, and she's just kind of trying to cope with her grief and move on, and she's hoping that throwing herself in her studies will help, and distancing herself from her father and her hometown will help, because, you know, at college she can be more than just the girl who lost her mom. But she ends up sort of wrapped up in this situation she is not prepared for, in which she discovers there are demons in the world and that there is a secret society called the Order of the Round Table, who are basically descendants of Knights of the Round Table and like King Arthur, and they kill these demons and protect humanity. So she finds herself being able to see this magic, which is highly unusual. She starts to suspect that something about either this order or the demons had something to do with her mother's death. So she ends up sort of getting involved with this group. It is so fun. It is really awesome if you like sort of the King Arthur tales or Arthurian legend. There's also a really great sort of tournament championship kind of element to it, if you like that, where she is competing to be the squire for these Legendborns. It's just, I have a hard time talking about this book because I'm just like, again, just gushing about how good it is, but the writing was so good. The characters were amazing. Bree is probably one of my favorite protagonists I've ever read. She feels so real, from like both with her grief and sort of her just experience as a young Black woman and like the microaggressions she deals with every day, and then also like how she's handling this crazy magical situation she finds herself in. There's also a love triangle in this book, which, you know, some people it's a deal breaker, other people it's gonna intrigue you, but I think this was a really well done love triangle. Again, the characters in this book are just so well written, and even the really like peripheral supporting characters I found myself really caring about while reading this. So if you're looking to start a new YA fantasy series, definitely recommend this one. I have no idea when the next one's coming out, but I'm desperately waiting for details because this is one of my favorite books that I've read all year so far. So this was obviously a 5 out of 5 because I loved it. It was amazing. I already want to reread it. Next up, we have The Bad Muslim Discount by Syed M. Masood, which I mostly listened to on audio, but I did go back and forth reading it a bit. So this story follows two sort of self-described bad Muslims. First, we have Anwar, and him and his family are from Pakistan, Karachi specifically, in the 90s. They're sort of witnessing the rise of extremist groups in their city, and his father, concerned for his family, decides to move them to California. It follows a story from him as a little boy to him through college. Anwar is such a fun character. He's very like irreverent. He has this really strange but charming relationship with his parents and his mom specifically, who is very like conservative Muslim. Anwar is not at all, and so you have like a really interesting sort of dynamic between the two. And then you also have Safwa, who is from Baghdad, and her life is just tragic. It was like emotional whiplash kind of going between the two. She loses her mother to cancer very early on. Her brother ends up getting sick and like terminally ill. Her father goes missing, presumably like taken by Americans. Her city is becoming a war zone. It's tragic all around. And she feels like she doesn't really have much of a life. She feels like she's trapped. And through a series of events, she's able to actually travel with her father and another man who is hoping to marry Safwa to America. But even then, she still feels really trapped by her situation, and her and Anwar's paths end up crossing, and you sort of see like how these two people who are both really estranged from their religion and their family and their culture deal with things in different ways. And this was a really interesting sort of like cultural perspective as well. I don't know, I've said previously, like, this book's kind of hard to talk about because I know religion is a really touchy thing. Not everyone is going to read this book and like it, but I thought it was really interesting, and I think Syed M. Masood did a really good job of showing a sort of variety of perspectives and outlooks on Islam. So I ended up giving this like a 3.5 out of 5. I did enjoy it, but contemporary is just like not usually my genre. So this wasn't like my favorite book of the month or by any means, but it was really enjoyable. And if it's the kind of thing you like to read, I definitely recommend it. Last up, we have A Witch in Time by Constance Sayers. And this book, I don't know, I was expecting much more of like a witchy thing to happen, and eventually it sort of did, but honestly, it had very strong Invisible Life of Addie LaRue vibes. If you really liked that book, I actually strongly recommend you pick this one up. Instead of having one girl who lives forever, you have this girl who finds herself being reincarnated, and you follow her modern day sort of iteration as she's sort of slowly having flashbacks about her previous lives and learning why she's in this situation. And it's really, it's a very like romantic like story where her and this like lover are sort of reincarnated together again and again. Coincidentally, again, if you liked Addie LaRue, there's also a demon sort of character also named Luke, who is also a love interest, but not as bad as Luke from Addie LaRue. So if you wanted a slightly more romantic perspective on that relationship, again, recommend this one. But yeah, I liked this more than I thought I would. I had a little bit of a hard time getting into it. I thought the modern day scenes were definitely the weakest, but the ones that read like more historical fiction where the main character's having these flashbacks to her previous lives, I thought were written and handled beautifully. Her first life especially, I thought was just so like so well written and so tragic, and I just really felt for her. And again, the historical fiction elements I thought in this book were handled really, really well, and I'm honestly actually really interested in reading anything else that this author does that is kind of more along those historical fiction lines, because I think that was the strongest part of this book. But yeah, this had a really great like magical realism element to it as well, and again, a nice like romance story kind of weaved through. So I gave this one a 4 out of 5. I really enjoyed it. I don't think it was quite as strong as Addie LaRue, which I've compared it to several times in this little segment, but it was a really lovely story. And I think if you liked Addie LaRue, you would like this one. All right, and those were all the books that I read in April. Unfortunately, I didn't get to my entire TBR, but I did get to a good chunk of them and then some. I did do some mood reading, obviously, here and there. That kind of cut into my time to get into my TBR, but I'm still hoping to get to the other books eventually. I am currently in the middle of Master of One, which was one of the books that I pulled from my previous TBR video, so hopefully I'll have that one done in time for the next monthly wrap-up. I had a really lovely reading month. I think I only strongly disliked one book, and as I said before, I don't think it was bad. I just don't think it was for me. Like, I was not the right audience for it. I'm gonna give this reading month a thumbs up. It was pretty good. Let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these books and what you thought about them, or if you want to read these books. Strongly recommend pretty much all of them. So yeah, and feel free to follow my socials down in the description box below, and have a wonderful day. Bye.